You are listening to the Body Charge podcast, and I'm your host, Sandy Sanderson. Welcome to the Body Charge podcast. Today's topic is what causes ankles to get stiff, painful, or prone to injury. Flexibility and resilience of muscles and joints is a hallmark of youthfulness, but over time our ankles can become more restricted in movement and therefore more prone to injury, arthritis, inflammation, neuropathy, or venous ulcers. This condition not only causes pain, but impairs the ability to do exercise, which we need to maintain optimal blood circulation and vascular health. My special guest today is Dr. Richard P. Jacoby, DPM, a board-certified podiatrist and director of Valley Foot Surgeons. With a career spanning over 5 decades, Dr. Jacoby specialises in the treatment of peripheral neuropathy with regenerative medicine and non-surgical solutions, including stem cell therapy. He believes neuropathy is a systemic issue that can manifest in conditions such as diabetic neuropathy, MS, autism, Alzheimer's, and he also specialises in the treatment of various foot and ankle conditions, including plantar fasciitis, sprains, and fractures. So welcome, Dr. Jacoby. Lovely to have you on board.
Well, thank you. You gave me the English pronunciation of my name, Jacoby. So I say Jacoby, but a lot of people in England say Jacoby. So, but either one is acceptable.
Fantastic. Fantastic. My first question is, what does carbohydrate and sugar metabolism have to do with peripheral neuropathy?
Answer: everything. So my quest goes back 50 years, as you stated. So diabetes, which is a Greek word, means to siphon out sweet water. That sweet water is sugar. So glucose, which is another Greek word, means to adhere, to stick together. It's glue. It's a poison. So anything more than 1 teaspoon at any one time, which is 4 grams, is a poison. So, but it's like everything else. The dose is the poison. If it's under 4 grams, then it's essential for life. If it's over, it will kill you. And I noticed with your first question on ankle stiffness, which I never had asked me by anybody before, by the way, but the answer is glycation. And glycation is to take off on the word glucose, which means sticking proteins and fats together. So it's a direct answer to your question of why ankles get stiff. So there are a lot of papers on that, especially in the Achilles tendon. So when the sugar levels are high in the body, they glycosylate, which means they get a sticky substance, which is sugar, in the tissue, which reduces their stretchability, if that's a proper word.
And also not only the viscosity of the blood, isn't it? That also gets kind of thicker and more gluggy.
Right, and that's what the hemoglobin A1C is. You're measuring the glycosylation of the red blood cell. That's the hallmark of diabetes. So when I hear these questions, especially in my field, which is diabetic neuropathy, and then when I extrapolate that knowledge that I have and I express it in other areas of the body, when all the different experts that I deal with throughout the world, they kind of tell me to stay in my lane. Well, I think they should drive in my lane and learn what I've learned, and maybe they can solve the problem of autism, Alzheimer's, MS, ALS, and all the other neurodegenerative diseases. I think I've done that in my first book, Sugar Crush, that was published 10 years ago. And my new book, Unglued, just came out, and that's a play on the word of glucose is a glue, which it is. And how do you get unglued? And the answer is stem cells. I wanted to ask you that question. Are stem cells being utilized in Australia or in that area of the world?
Yes, to some degree. It's not used in a widespread manner in the status quo. It's still a little bit on the periphery, so you'll need an alternative health practitioner usually to supply those kind of supplements. But we always tend to follow what the US does eventually.
Yes, and that is a big problem. And I'm embarrassed to say this. Our American medical system is absolutely based on an outcome based on drugs. They don't work, never worked, and will never work. And all our American treasury is going to that end to fulfill the big pharma through the FDA, which is, when you think about it, do you have an FDA? I assume you do, but I don't
Our
know.
equivalent is TGA, and they follow everything the FDA does. So it's pretty well a copy.
Oh, so they're in cahoots with big pharma.
Yep.
So when I started out, and this is 50 years ago, I worked at the Ben Franklin Clinic in Philadelphia where I trained. And we were working on PKU, which is phenylketonuria, which is a birth defect. Now, I was not the chief scientist. I was the assistant to Dr. Michael Sheff, who was out of England, by the way. And he worked with Watson and Crick on the discovery of DNA. And he was doing the research. I was his research assistant. I fed the rats. And looking back, we were feeding the rats different chows, which is sugar. Now, rats can eat anything, but if you feed them grain, they're going to get disease. And that's exactly what we did. So that thought pattern that I established back then, that was 1966.
And of course, grain cause more glucose in the body. The body treats grain foods like sugar, right?
Well, they are. That's what they are. So that's a long chain carbohydrate. And when you break it down, you get a monosaccharide, and that's sugar. And then we get into moving forward. After I finished my surgical residency in Philadelphia, then I came out to Scottsdale, Arizona, and I did traditional podiatric surgery. Now, I think podiatric physicians in the United States and Australia, I don't know the law there, but we are kind of like mini orthopedic surgeons. So we either practice the neurologic sciences or the orthopedic. Now, I did the orthopedic in the beginning, and I had the fortune to run into, and I mean literally run into, Dr. Lee Dellon out of Johns Hopkins. And that's a very famous medical school, and he's a very famous doctor. And he was working on a concept that carpal tunnel, he had a patient in 1980s, that's 40 years ago. This is not new information, I'm telling you, but it's new information to the world. So he had a patient who had diabetes with carpal tunnel. Now let me just preface this. In the 1960s, there were 12 reported cases in the entire global literature. 12.
They're pretty rare.
Pretty rare. Not rare in Australia now, not rare in the United States. We had 600,000 surgeries last year for carpal tunnel. And there were 12 in the 1960s. So what has happened? 1974, that's when high fructose corn syrup was introduced into the American diet. And I assume in your diet as well. Now it's 85 to 90% of all the food in the United States is made with that substance. Now you take glucose, which is a natural poison. And let me just bring that back to reality and couch it with Dr. Dellon's theory of nerve compression. Let me give you a background on what that is. Sucrose is it's two sugars, fructose and glucose. Glucose is not sweet. You couldn't eat glucose. It's disgusting. But fructose is sweet. So when you combine the two, you eat abundance of that. When you make it into a liquid form, oh, yum, it's in everything. You can put it in a chair you're sitting on and grind it up to a powder and add high fructose corn syrup.
They're sneaky. They even put it in salad dressing. You know, you don't even know you have it.
Oh, it's right, it's in everything. So now glucose responds by upping your insulin. But fructose doesn't. So they got it through the FDA. Our FDA means Food and Drug Administration. Isn't that an interesting term? Here's the poison the poisonous of food. They snuck it in. It ruins your leptin, which is a hormone to say stop eating, as they're bringing in, like a Trojan horse, glucose into your body that spikes the insulin. Now, if they don't know that, they're criminals. This is insanity. Now, I don't care. I mean, I get this question every day. I really don't care what you eat. I just want to tell you what you're eating is killing you. Now, if you want to eat it, that's fine. I play a lot of pickleball. This question came. It's funny on the ankle and stiffness because that question comes up, and the question of fruit came up because everybody asked me these questions. Well, you're saying sugar is bad. You're saying that fruit juice is bad? Well, I rephrase that. I'm going to rephrase what fruit is. Fruit is neither bad nor good, like everything else in the universe. But if you want to get fat, eat fruit. That's its purpose. Like you take a bear. You don't have bears over there, do you? We got bears.
We have koalas, but they're not bears, but they're all also round and cuddly and fuzzy.
Yeah, they're cuddly and
they eat all day long. They eat
all day long. Yeah, they're herbivores. So they eat the leaves of the trees. But my point is, here in Canada, throughout the world, in the northern hemisphere, bears hibernate. When they come out of hibernation in the spring, they're emaciated. They have no fat. So the first thing they do is find berries, fruit, blueberries, whatever. But it only lasts for about 6 weeks. They eat literally tons of fruit for one purpose, to put fat on their body. That's what it's for. Then when that stops, they go back to their carnivore ways. And you have a very famous carnivore doctor, Dr. Chaffee, in Australia. Are you familiar with him?
No, actually, but I'm familiar with the big movement now towards ketogenic diets or close to ketogenic, so low carbohydrate, in order to mitigate the effects of sugars, because they cause so many traffic jams in our capillaries. And what happens with the stiffness that I've read about is that there's less blood flow, therefore less oxygen and nutrient can be delivered to the extremities because of these traffic jams. And then eventually the acidosis grows as a direct result of metabolic byproducts from the digestion of carbohydrates. And as the acidity grows and the body can't rebalance the pH, it pulls calcium out of the bones, which then settle in the soft tissue and joints. And you usually, when you're in that situation, you're very low in magnesium. So that's my specialty. We produce Elektra Magnesium products for skin and muscle care because you can bypass the digestive system. And that helps to relax muscles and introduce more flexibility and helps blood circulation. And magnesium is also known in many studies to control calcium levels in the body but you have to have enough of it. So if calcium dominates, it becomes a bully. And it is used as an alkalizing mineral. And that's the reason scientists believe that it accumulates in the soft tissue, because it's addressing a pH problem. But then the side effects are it gets stuck and then things get stiffer over time. Is this your observation?
Yes. So calcium, especially in the arterial wall. So let's look at that biochemistry. So Dr. Chaffee, who is from Australia, he really started the carnivore diet. He's a neurosurgeon. And I agree with what he says. And all these things are true. So let's go back to Dr. Dellon. 1984, patient had carpal tunnel, and the elbow is called the ulnar tunnel, and she had numbness of her fingers, and she was diabetic. He operated on her, restored her sensation, and she said to him, Dr. Dellon, why don't you fix my leg? He said, well, that's a different disease. That's diabetic polyneuropathy. But he thought about it, went to the laboratory, and I won't belabor all that, but there are a lot of great studies he did. It's the same disease, just a different location.
Yeah.
So I don't know if in Australia you think of carpal tunnels separate and distinct from tarsal tunnel or diabetic neuropathy, diabetic ulcers, venous stasis ulcers. It's all the same thing.
We're very good at labeling, aren't we, and creating different categories like branches on a tree. But if you follow the branches, they lead to the same trunk, right?
Very well said. And that's exactly what he discovered. Well, he trained me almost 25 years ago now. So I had read his textbooks, I read his papers. He trained me in peripheral nerve surgery. I brought that concept back to Scottsdale. I didn't have any amputations. I've done thousands of those procedures. And one of your questions is about ulcerations. And the reason they don't heal is because the blood supply to the nerve is cut off. So let's use a little bit of that biochemistry that I learned from Dr. Dellon. Number one, the Maillard reaction. That is sugar plus a protein causes the chemical reaction. So think of the nerve. I'm going to use my wire here on my phone. Can you see that there?
Yep.
Okay, so let's say that's the nerve. When you have the Maillard reaction, which is really a cooking term, sugar plus protein, it shrink wraps the nerve, compresses it. Number two, the polyol pathway is sugar inside the nerve that is pulling water into the nerve, and it swells the nerve. Well, when a nerve goes through a tunnel, carpal tunnel, the blood supply gets cut off. I thought there was an additional biochemical reaction. So I went up to Stanford. Are you familiar with Stanford University?
Yes.
Okay, and that's one of our Johns Hopkins, Stanford, Harvard. So I went to all these places with the idea that there was another concept here, and there is, and it's called the nitric oxide pathway. So I worked with Dr. Cook at Stanford. He's a cardiologist by training. He's got a PhD in vascular biology. One molecule, asymmetric dimethylarginine. Fancy word, but really what it means is when you're taking an amino acid like L-arginine, you're converting it to nitric oxide. At that asymmetric, where it means the two methyl groups are on one side, it blocks that pathway. It blocks the blood flow, to your point. That's what it is. Yes. So now we have three pathways that are interrupting the blood supply. So I said to Dr. Dellon 25 years ago, I said, well, if this is true, and this is true, and that's true, and that's true, wouldn't all nerves be the same? And yes. Now, Dr. Cook and I looked at that, and the first one we looked at my patients, about 160 patients with that molecule, and the first thing we saw was a cluster of patients who had MS. What does the word MS means? Multiple sclerosis, another Greek word, sclerosis, hardening. Mm-hmm. Same word is used in atherosclerosis. You know what athero means in Greek?
No.
It's kind of funny. I don't think anybody knows any of this stuff because they've just been educated into ignorance. And terms, I mean, these terms got tacked on 400 or 500 years ago. But I like to. Yep. Yeah, so I did a deep dive on that. Guy's name is Virchow back in Vienna in the 1860s. He came up with that term because he spoke Greek, as a lot of scientists in those days did. Athero means gunk, hardened gunk in your artery. Well, how is that a disease? That's an effect of what sugar does. That's all it is. So then they came up with this concept, 1974 again, by the way, when the high fructose corn syrup was coming around. And they started looking at cholesterol with Ansel Keys, late 60s, early 70s. Oh, it's cholesterol. Cholesterol has nothing to do with cardiovascular disease, diabetic neuropathy, or anything else.
Yeah.
But it does monitor. Huh?
It's a secondary thing. It
yes,
happens to be there as a result. Like the police arriving at a car accident. They're there, but they didn't cause the car accident.
That's exactly what I say. So when I was with Dr. Cook, now remember, he's a cardiologist, and this is 20 years ago, I asked him the question. I knew the answer. I just didn't want to be embarrassed with him. He's the world's leading cardiologist in the United States, by the way. And I said to him, I said, I'm confused about the cholesterol hypothesis. And he explained the whole thing to me. The endothelium, which is the lining of the blood vessel called the endothelium, smooth. It's like Teflon.
Yes.
When you eat sugar, it makes it like Velcro. And you're right. I use the metaphor of an ambulance. You hear, because it's the signaling molecule of the cholesterol from the liver. When it sees that trauma, it responds with signal, sends the cholesterol to put that plaque down, which is atherosclerosis. And by the way, I was the keynote speaker to the International Interventional Cardiologist this February in Scottsdale. And I don't know why they asked me, because they were getting a totally different point of view. And I explained exactly what we were talking about. Sugar causes cardiovascular disease. Cholesterol is a secondary invader. But when you come up with a drug and you use some false studies like Ansel Keys, and then you create a statin drug, it does lower the cholesterol. But why would you do that? Well, to make $1 trillion. That's what it just passed in US dollars. Trillion. It's criminal.
Half the brain is made of cholesterol fat, and all the nerve sheaths that run throughout the body have to have cholesterol sheaths to protect the nerves. So cholesterol is a very important integrative part of the body we can't afford to lose, really. But it's a type of cholesterol, I think, when it becomes oxidized from the pollution, the acidity, those waste products, there's an oxidation effect that occurs. And then, it's the job of the liver to try and recycle it and clean it up. If people have problems with the liver, that doesn't happen as well as it should.
If the liver is clogged up with fatty liver because of high fructose corn syrup, those enzymatic processes are not there. But there's also it's a mechanical, go back to the nerve, okay? That's called demyelination. That's what you just talked about. How does it demyelinate? Well, the Nobel Prize, the process is called Wallerian degeneration. It was Dr. Waller. If you squeeze the nerve, the myelin dies back. Why is the nerve dying back with loss of myelin? Because it's mechanically compressed from the effects of sugar.
Squeezed.
Right, that's what it is. So let's go back. So back to the MS. So I started to look at all the different labels for different nerves. MS is the vagus nerve in the brain.
Very important.
Now, Dr. Perlmutter, are you familiar with him? He wrote Grain Brain.
Grain Brain, yes. I actually have the book. Yeah.
Yeah, so Dr. Perlmutter, and this is why I think can you see that? He's on the front of my book, Sugar Crush. He never read this book. He wanted to be on the front of the book. Is he a great neurologist? Yes, he is. He's a brilliant guy, but he's a neurologist. That's his problem. Neurologists are not surgeons. He could not see what I saw with Dr. Dellon, who is a surgeon. So let's go back to Dr. Dellon, Dr. Perlmutter, and why the neurologists are so upset with all these surgeons. Okay, so Dr. Dellon, now, he started in the 70s. And he's traditional. He's really developed these procedures. So when I trained with him, he said, read my textbook, which is like that, which I did. And I understood his theory, but I never saw it. Because when I'm doing surgery, I don't use magnification. And he said, put these loops on, which are 3.5 magnification. I put the loops on. Now, with his thought in mind that this is a mechanical compression, okay? You could not see that. Dr. Perlmutter can't see that. You have to be a surgeon. So I'm in there, and we're on the common peroneal nerve, which is the big nerve in the leg, which I've seen that 1,000 times. Now, with Dellon's thought in my mind. It is compression. Put the lens on, and I went, oh my God, there it is.
There it is.
It's nothing complicated. It's a viewpoint that he had, and now he's showing me how to see it. Then I went to, I don't have that book here. Then I went to Mayo to study microsurgery, and I'm using 20 magnification. You can see it. You can see it in every nerve that goes through a tunnel. It's compressed. So MS, in my opinion, is a nerve compression of the vagus nerve. ALS, the guy right next to it, the ninth cranial nerve, that supplies the nerves to the muscles around your respiratory system. And that gets compressed.
Yep.
Well, if we squeeze this nerve to your wrist, this doesn't happen.
Yes.
If you squeeze the nerve to your respiratory system, you stop breathing. That's how you die with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis.
Yep.
It's just another Greek word, by the way, or actually Latin for that one. MS, ALS. Let's talk about autism.
All squeezing. Yes.
Yeah,
how does autism fit into that picture?
Another nerve. What's the first symptom of autistic kids?
Difficulty in communication, and they're very...
Perfect. You just answered the question. So let's follow that back. What nerve is that?
The vagus nerve, and they have issues with digestion?
No. Hypoglossal nerve. The nerve that runs, hypoglossal means, hypo means under, glossal means the structures in your tongue and mouth and articulation.
Swallowing.
So the nerve that runs underneath your chin to your tongue. So if this nerve is compressed, do you think you could express yourself better or worse?
Oh, worse.
Of course. So we have these kids, which, by the way, it's up to
because their senses aren't being decoded by the brain properly. They can't interpret what's happening in the environment very well. Because
their nerve is compressed. So there's good papers. No, this is my theory. I can't get anybody to understand
it. It makes a lot of sense. So we're nearing the end, and I'd like to cover how you use stem cell therapy. Let's assume you've changed the diet and avoiding the sugars and, doing some exercise and good lifestyle protocols, having more magnesium. How do you fix this constriction that's happening? Let's say in someone who's having a venous leg ulcer and it won't heal, and none of the steroids or the antibiotics or whatever they use is working.
Okay. Well, they work on that. We use amniotic membrane grafts, which is a form of perinatal tissue, the stem cell, which is now outlawed for injections. We can put it on as a covering, but the FDA just declared that amniotic fluid is a drug. After 3 million years, Lucy, if she's our first primate, she was a drug dealer.
Mothers are now drug dealers.
Mothers are now mules if they're pregnant. They're carrying drugs. So how does it work? It's like magic. I've been doing this for about 15 years. The leading authority in the United States, Dr. Neil Reardon, he's from Scottsdale, by the way, right around the corner from me. He went to Panama, took his clinic there. Let's just talk about autism, okay? It's in my new book, Unglued. Autistic kid, I'm there in Panama because we can't do that here because we have to do a double-blind study, $100 million, take 10 years while we let these kids just rot to death. So I'm in Panama, lots of autistic kids. You do IV of cultured umbilical tissue. That's what they use. That's what we all use. So I'm there in the cafeteria in this big clinic and lots of autistic kids. I go up to this mom. I said, "Is your first time here?" And she says, "No, it's my third time." I said, "Really? What? Why?" "Well, does it work?" "Yes, it does." "Well, why do you come back?" "Because it wears off." I'm watching the kid eat muffins, orange juice, all this crap. He's about 12 years old. And I said to him, "It's sugar." And she says, well, I said, tell me what happens. You get the IV infusion of umbilical tissue. Well, he can speak. I said, what did he say? He said, I want a donut. And then goes, then is cured. I'll use the word cured because the inflammation around the hypoglossal nerve. Then she gets all bent out of shape with me. I'm going to give my kid what he wants and all this. I said, it's sugar. It's that simple. Now, stem cells really don't care what nerve it is. They're going to fix any inflammatory itis, as I call them, from autism to Alzheimer's, ALS,
Yep.
it doesn't matter,
It's the
diabetic
inflammation.
neuropathy.
Yes, the
That's
immune
what it
system.
is.
Yeah, gets
That's
triggered
it.
by too much sugar and acid, and then you can't stop the inflammatory process, and that produces even more acids and more swelling and more pressure on the nerves.
Right.
So stem cells found has a big impact on keeping that inflammation under control. Yeah.
Yeah. So why is it not used? Why are the FDAs of the world blocking it?
Good question.
Why? Because it works. That's why. But they did see fit to make it a drug. Isn't that interesting? So we need more research, 10 years, $100 million. Well, wait a minute. You approved high fructose corn syrup without that study.
That's true.
So the FDA, the food is causing the inflammation.
Yep.
Stem cells reverses it.
Fantastic.
So it's that simple.
That's hopeful. I'm so excited about what you're doing, and also the other researchers on in your area of expertise. If people want to know more and want to read about what you've written and discovered, where do they go?
Well, I think most people go to Amazon now. So my first book, which is 10 years old, but it does explain what I call the global compression theory of all the nerves. So if you have an itis, as I like to say, you're taking a medication for some inflammatory thing, you ought to read this book.
Yep.
Change your diet, number one.
I'm going to get it.
And then my new book, Unglued, tells you how to get off of sugar, use stem cells, use magnesium. I'm a big advocate. I looked at your website, by the way. You have a lot of great products. And the physiology that's essential. Calcium,
Just do no
magnesium.
harm. That's my policy. Very safe and effective.
Right. And yeah, the electrolytes, because we live in a very hot climate here. I take magnesium. I use the magnesium products. I didn't use yours because I didn't know about them, but shout out to you. And it's such a simple thing to do, is because the reason, in my way of thinking, when that balance of electrolytes is off due to compression, all these other things, even the bowel, that's a muscle, right?
Yeah.
So the mesenteric artery and nerve, that's what peristalsis is.
Yeah, and magnesium helps the blood flow, the zeta potential of the blood, and it relaxes the smooth muscle on the endothelial lining, so it's very anti-thrombotic.
Yeah, what a concept. Grandmother knew that. Epsom salts, right?
Yeah, that's it. Well, that's magnesium sulfate, but
yeah,
we find magnesium chloride is more user-friendly and gives you more elemental magnesium. So we put it in all our skincare products for convenience. Elektra magnesium for skin, for muscle care. There's lots of different versions to suit different skin types. The idea being you need to do it every day because we don't get enough from the food anymore. Even if you think you're eating a fresh, healthy, organic food diet, stress causes you to pee out excessive magnesium.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And all those foods, organic or not, I'm not sure that is even real anymore, because fruits and vegetables, they're not fruits and vegetables we had, 40 years, 20 years ago. They're hybrids.
Yeah.
They're genetically modified.
Yeah, fillers.
I mean, the apple is perfect. The berries are perfect. You have to take a license out to grow those. Every year they give you a new license.
Yeah.
It's
yeah, I'm a
I
big
don't know
supporter of the organic and the regenerative food industry.
That's the solution for the planet as well, by the way. I think.
Yeah.
So your country, look up, what's his first name? Chaffee. I forget his first name, but he's the expert on the carnivore diet. He explains it very well, and just a great contribution.
Yeah,
So,
we could put that link underneath the YouTube in the details area.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this podcast. I really appreciate your time today. I'm sure everyone will really find some good information to pass on.
Well, I thank you.
I hope you liked this conversation and will share it with others. Let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. If you want to listen to other Body Charge conversations, click like, subscribe, the bell icon, and click all notifications. Subscribe to our newsletter to get updates on blogs, podcasts, videos, and Magnesium special offers at electramagnesium.com.au. Relax, recharge, and recover.